on, so
Okay.
Oh, you're right.
I think it's just fine as it is. Yeah.
great. Okay, well, welcome everyone
Mhm.
to a new ACA Forum. Today, we are honored to have Oz Dincer and Michael Johnston presenting their new book, Corruption in America, a 50-Ring Circus. So I'm going to introduce them. They'll have half an hour to talk about their book, and then we will have another about half hour for questions and answers. So these are two giants in the field of corruption studies who, in my opinion, need no introduction. But for those neophytes, Oz Dincer is a professor of economics and the founding director of the Institute for Corruption Studies at Illinois State University. He holds a BS in economics from METU in Ankara, Turkey, and a PhD in economics from the University of Oregon. His research focuses on development and public economics with a particular emphasis on corruption. He has published widely on the economic and social consequences of corruption, including studies on its long-term effects on public health and democratic governance. Michael Johnston is the Charles A. Dana Professor of Political Science Emeritus at Colgate University in Hamilton, New York. He earned his PhD in political science from Yale University. Johnston is a leading scholar on political corruption, democratization, and governance, and is the author of influential works such as Syndromes of Corruption and Corruption, Contention, and Reform. He also served as a distinguished professor at the International Anti-Corruption Academy. And so this is a powerhouse team of authors, and we look forward to hearing about this amazing new book.
Variety of common interests within the group here, and I hope that the dissection of the American case will be particularly welcome because we live in an analytical world where still we're stuck on the more versus less corruption, full stop kind of narrative. In the United States, we have 50 different stories at least, and actually more than that. And the differences among them are not just quantitative. In fact, more to the point, they are qualitative. So it's been a real pleasure and privilege for me to work with Oz because his quantitative skills rings around mine, and he has been a pioneer in the measurement of legal and illegal corruption. I will add that my formal affiliation is with Colgate University, which is centrally isolated in Hamilton, New York, but I'm currently based in Austin, Texas, which is almost as good a place to look at corruption as is Chicago, which is Oz's turf. So thank you for having us, and thanks for the chance to discuss the book.
Well, thanks for inviting us. I was lucky to actually be able to work with Michael. I mean, if he's the Batman, I am the Robin here. So, and I'm basically tagging along. So, but it was really great actually working on this book because when you look at the U.S. states, most of them are actually very different from each other. If I always compare U.S. states with different countries in the world, you know, how close are Germany and Italy? I think they're closer than Mississippi and Vermont to each other.
Mm-hmm.
So if you look at United States, you have this gold mine if you want to work on any political or economic issues. And corruption is not different. And we have different types of corruption in these states. We have different levels of corruption in these states, and it depends on their political culture. It depends on their history. It depends on their populace. It's really, I think it's very interesting to look at the United States. And it also gives us a lot of advantages in terms of data because When you look at the US data at the state level, they're more comparable. You don't have the cross-country heterogeneity. You don't have a lot of problems that you do have when you do any cross-country analysis. So it gave us this huge advantage. And then it took a long time, actually. I think I met Michael in 2012, 13 at the Safra Center at Harvard, and we started working together developing these state level indices. And then it's basically, I mean, you can think of this book as this um, the 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 uh, the end result of this 10-year collaboration. So, and I'm very happy. I'm very excited, and I think it's a good contribution to the literature, really.
I think in one sense, and this is going to seem like a blindingly obvious point, but uh, it's good to shine a spotlight on the United States in a critical way. I mean, too many people based in the U.S. and, for that matter, based in the North and West, tend to talk about corruption as though they're observing it on another planet in some sense. That corruption is a problem out there, and certainly not here. And we have a variety of lessons to impart. When in fact, of course, we have corruption problems of our own. I don't know of any other country in the Americas where the chief executive is accepting a jumbo jet as a personal gift indirectly. There is a sense in which our dear leader is overlaying a traditional kind of political influence, market corruption with a kind of autocratic variety that is very concerning. And in that sense, we in the U.S. have so many lessons to learn from other places. People are saying, well, this is all new to you in the U.S. Take a look at Hungary over the past 15 years and see what's happened there. Take a look at Venezuela at various times and learn from that as well. So I'm hoping that what we can do not only today, but in the book will be just part of a much longer and more elaborate conversation.
Yeah. So I think what the book does, when you talk about corruption, people seem to think it only happens in Nigeria or in Turkey or in Afghanistan, so on and so forth. And nobody talks about corruption in industrialized rich countries. But we do have corruption in the industrialized rich countries. And we do have a lot of corruption in the United States. When you talk to people in the US, they complain about corruption, but what they understand from corruption is completely different from what we understand from corruption. And when everybody says, oh, our governor is corrupt, our president is corrupt, our this corrupt, our that corrupt, but when it comes to when the election comes, they never think about corruption, when they never vote according to that, right? So I think one of the main contributions of the book is, first, we provide 3 different measures of corruption at the state level. We compare and contrast these measures, and using these 3 measures, sometimes only one, sometimes only 2 of them, but we look at the long-term consequences of corruption in the United States in terms of health, in terms of inequality, in terms of economic growth, in terms of a bunch of other things. And we also look at the causes of corruption. Why are some states more corrupt than the others? And we look at deep determinants such as the political culture, and we also look at some proximate determinants. And to me, it's kind of an eye-opener because, like I said, when people talk about corruption in the United States, they never think of why are some states growing faster than the others, and what is the role of corruption into that? Or why is poverty higher in some states than others? Or one of the chapters that I like the most is the police killings of Black Americans and how it ties to corruption at the state level. And these are the issues that I think we need to discuss more. We need to look into it. And it can apply to other contexts. I'm not saying they can do the same study, but the results, I think, can be generalized, what we have for the United States to the other rich countries, even maybe sometimes for the poor countries as well. And the other big contribution of the book, I think, is the relationship between legal and illegal corruption. And legal corruption, people started talking about it a little bit before we started talking about it, but it's recently becoming popular, the term. And uh, up until our study, all of the researchers, they looked at these two as substitutes. If you cannot bend the rule, you can break the rule, right? One versus the other. But what we found is actually these two complement each other in the United States. They actually feed off each other. I think that's another issue that we need to look into it in more detail and more carefully.
Book makes too is that looking policy sector by policy sector, the police killings, the environment, economic development, public health, and this is something that Oz really brought to the table for us, is the background of his work in public health. You get a real sense of just how embedded and impacted the corruption problem is. And I mean, and again, for much of the rest of the world, that's not going to be an insight. But a lot of people still talk about, let's go out and tackle corruption. Let's pass a couple of laws. Let's change the form of the ballot. Let's go to preference voting or something like that. And that will solve our problems. This problem is systemic. In some respects, corruption is the system. In some of our states and in some of our sectors. And it is so embedded in values and attitudes as well. One of the things I think the book shows is that the issues we're looking at are not just legal and institutional, but they are political. They have to do with mass media and coverage of politics. And in particular, they have to do, at least by implication, with levels of trust. That's a real crisis in the American system at the moment. One that I think in some respects is born of political naivete. That's just my own personal opinion, but it's one in which people have a set of both expectations and grievances about the system that really bear very little relationship to what we think we're looking at when we dig into the corruption side of things. So real accountability is a question of justice. Police killings is a question of justice, and this is a level of crisis in the system that very few in the United States really are looking at. In some respects, I shouldn't have mentioned our dear leader and his jet, because the problem is not just particular personalities. The issues run far deeper and are much more systemic.
So the other issue that Michael touched upon it a little bit. We actually did a nice empirical analysis on it, is how corruption coverage affects corruption. So it's naive to think that we can fight with corruption by policing only. So it's very hard to try and convict a public employee for corruption. The example that I give all the time is Rod Blagojevich, the former governor of Illinois. In his first trial, they could not convince one jury member. One juror did not think he was guilty, although he was on tape trying to sell Obama's Senate seat. But it was a mistrial. In the second one, he got convicted. And the entire trial lasted more than I think a couple of years, maybe 3 years or something like that. And there are ranges of cost estimates from $5 million to $30 million. So, like I said, I mean, it was an obvious case. He was on tape, and it was still very, very difficult to convict him. And now he was pardoned, so he's out. So if we cannot if we cannot deal with corruption by policing only, so how are we going to deal with it? So one way that everybody agrees on is just vote them out. But voting is also a trust issue. People don't trust the democratic system because of corruption. So voter participation goes down. On top of that, corruption is not really adequately covered. If you look at the United States, corruption is covered at the federal level. So there are a lot of journalists, there are a lot of political journalists, investigative journalists, they're watching Washington, D.C. like hawk, right? But at the state level or at the even local level, there's nobody watching anything. State level press is dying, local press is dying. There are these media deserts. So if the voters are not informed about who's doing what, how are we gonna kick them out of the office? So first, we have low voter participation. Second, well, there are a few voters who are willing to vote, but they don't know anything about what's happening in their state or in their city. So of course, if you're a corrupt politician, you can be re-elected easily. I mean, Blagojevich, when he was running for his second term, he got re-elected easily, but the voter participation in Illinois was about 45%. If you go down to the local levels, unfortunately, we didn't have data to do that. But if you go down to city level, county level, it's even worse. The latest figures in Chicago mayoral election, participation was less than 30%. If I'm not mistaken, in Dallas, this was about 5 years ago, voter participation for mayoral election was less than 10%. I, I, I can't hear you, Michael.
Single digits, you're exactly right.
Yeah. So, I mean, if 1 in 10 is voting, I mean, Dallas is a big city. I'm not talking about this 100,000 small city. I'm talking about a major city in one of the major states in the US, and less than 1 in 10 is voting. So, yeah, I mean, if I have a little bit more money, I would like to run for mayor in Dallas and win and steal as much as possible and leave. Or stay because you can get reelected all the time, right? So one of the measures that we use in the book is a perceptions index that we constructed based on surveys to political reporters in US for 50 states. We did it for 5 years. And we asked reporters about their perceptions regarding legal corruption, illegal corruption. But we also asked if corruption is appropriately and adequately covered or not. And depending on that, we use that index in our empirical analysis. And we did find that coverage matters, and it matters a lot. So yes, these two are complementary, legal corruption and illegal corruption. And a lot of the times voter participation matters, but voter participation matters only if voters are informed about corruption. Otherwise, you can actually steal and steal and steal elections over and over and stay corrupt.
Point, because there's a lot of public anger about corruption in the US, as in many other places around the world. But the level of public knowledge is really abysmal. I mean, you get a sort of, oh, they're all corrupt, or what I hear all the time, you know, oh, you're studying corruption. You should come down to our town if you want to see corruption. Well, I mean, fine. I'm not so sure. But there's some interesting data showing that in cities where a newspaper has folded, where it has been lost, and there is a depressingly large number of cities, in fact, the quality of local government fiscal practices declines local bonded indebtedness goes up, supervision and oversight of borrowing declines in quality, and people are just not going to know that, even if they are interested in doing so and recognize the importance of that kind of information. And so that loss of news media coverage is a critical kind of influence. One other aspect of the book, and not trying to change the subject necessarily, it is indirectly related to what we've been talking about, is our emphasis on states' political cultures. Anybody in the United States knows, anybody who's visited the United States knows that politics and government in Mississippi are different from what they are in Vermont, and they're different again from what they are in New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and so forth. And of course, there are some differences within states too, Illinois being a prime example. But we were able to take a look at our indicators of corruption in comparison to Daniel Elazar's longstanding typology of state political cultures. Now, three of the main subcultures, the moralistic, the individualistic, the traditionalistic, do matter, and they matter in ways that are pervasive. It's important to note, and I always used to do this with my students, that on a global scale, the variation in American subcultures sort of runs from A to B, or maybe A to A prime. The global variation is far wider yet. But even within the U.S. and even within the sort of generally consistent institutional frameworks of state governments, we find important variations relating to history, patterns of settlement, values that are passed on, not just public opinion from month to month, but values that are passed on from generation to generation. Those kinds of factors matter, and it's one of the sorts of things that any kind of national corruption index figure is going to miss for any big country, and especially for any federal country. So we have been privileged to be able to look at that in some detail, and hope that will be the start of further conversation.
And so, I mean, Bonnie and Joe, you guys probably noticed this already, but in Mexico, for instance, you have a federal system, you have a bunch of states, and I'm assuming these states are very different from each other. So when you look at the, say, TI's corruption index or World Bank's control of corruption index, they put just this Mexico number, 2.3, whatever, right? But it's bigger than that. I mean, you cannot really lump Mexico into just one number. I mean, yeah, you can lump Cuba in one number. It's such a small island, right? But you can, when you talk about Brazil, when you talk about Mexico, when you talk about China, Russia, it's different. I mean, you cannot just assign one figure and treat that country using that one figure only. I mean, it's um, this another important aspect of our book is, I think, directing attention to that. So when you look at countries like US, you should actually go into more detail. You should actually look at what's happening at the local level, what's happening at the state level. I mean, even countries like England, Germany, I mean, England is not a federal country, but I think our approach applies there too. Germany is a federal country, yes, but um, so we should, there are attempts to do this now. I think the Quality of Government Institute, they have their corruption survey. They look at the EU at the NUTS 1, NUTS 2, NUTS 3 levels, I think different regional levels. That's a good attempt. But there are a couple of minor surveys looking at Russia. There are a couple of, but I know of one study doing this in Mexico. But I don't know anything about, say, Brazil or Argentina, and especially countries like Brazil, Argentina, where corruption is really high. We should look at what's happening at the state level because you can see major differences across these states, and you can get some clues how to deal with corruption, right? And then also we say political culture. We're not saying, some people, some countries are culturally corrupt. I mean, when you use this term political culture, people have a tendency to misunderstand what you're saying, right? No, it's basically some states are more tolerant towards corruption because of their preferences. Their preferences is what? I mean, is it economic growth? Is it this? Is it that? So based on their preferences, corruption is on the third list or on the list on the fourth or the fifth, whatever. But nobody likes corruption. Nobody justifies corruption. But it's basically there's a benefit and cost to deal with anything. And in those states, yeah, they don't care as much as some other states. I mean, this example Michael gives all the time. In Minnesota, for instance, this guy is running for city council, I think. So he visits retirement communities, retirement homes to talk to potential voters. He brings Kit Kats and other candy. They try the guy for vote buying, right? In some other state, dead people vote and people don't care. Like in Louisiana, I think it happens all the time. Dead people keep voting in Louisiana. So, so this is what we mean by political culture. Minnesota it's a moralistic political culture. People don't tolerate corruption at all, and they hate it. And sometimes they go to extremes.
There was a case actually in Minnesota a number of years ago in which, in a very close gubernatorial election for governor of the state, it was revealed that a section of highway had been built, the concrete had been poured when the temperature was about 2 degrees below the specifications. And a huge outcry. The governor is playing politics with public safety and transportation, and in effect, I suppose he was. But in New York State, where I used to live, that would not even make page 91 of the newspaper if there was still a page 91. No, concrete built. Gee, I wonder who got the contract. Maybe I can get one next time. So there are those differences, or in a variety of other countries too. In Argentina, there's good research showing that in some respects, state level alliances between businesses, governors of the states, and sometimes the military, sometimes other local interests are some of the strongest institutions in Argentina. Operating at that state level, and that's something again that a one number corruption index is going to obscure. It's not going to reveal at all. This is one reason why I think one thing that we did in the book was to bring political science and economics to the table in some useful ways, because you need an economist to go out and get really good data and the really good measures. I did a panel at OECD some years ago, and in a flight of fancy or whatever, I said that wherever the study of corruption is going, American political science will get there last, because we took a very long time to realize the importance of the topic and much less to get serious about it. But economists have been leading the way in many places, and Oz's data really opened up a whole level of questions about the American states and for research elsewhere that I think deserves a great deal of attention. Do we isolate any cures? I think in many respects we move in the opposite direction, because we were showing the embeddedness and the complexity and the contrasts of the corruption problems. But at the same time, I think we have pointed to factors like history, political culture, values, political trust, and the like as important parts of the mix, and not just are we bringing court cases to be prosecuted or something like that. So my hope is that whatever the merits of what we have put between two covers, that there will be a lot of further work and a lot of further conversation, not only on the substantive issues, but just how do we measure, how do we assess, how do we set up the basic questions.
Yeah, the other issue is the stickiness of corruption, right? I mean, it's also, you know, a country or a state doesn't become corrupt overnight. So it takes time. But once it becomes corrupt, it stays there. It's this, um, what was that virus? You know, when you get it, it stays in your body. You cannot get rid of it. Like every time, you know, it flares up. Or is it shingles? Is it shingles? Yeah. So it's like, it's always there, right? So, so you cannot really get rid of it in 1 year or in 2 years or in 3 years. You have to keep working on it, right? Anytime there's an institutional weakness, it's going to pop up. So you have to keep controlling it. And so that's why we're not really proposing any solutions because I mean, there is no one solution really, right? I mean, it depends on where you are. It depends on uh, your current situation. And once you introduce a solution, you have to keep working on it because you're not going to see the results tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. It's going to take a long time. Like in some states, people are used to it. That is the equilibrium, right? And nobody has any incentive to deviate from that point. Everybody is used to living with corruption. They accepted that system. So you should give people a huge incentives to deviate from that equilibrium point. Uh, you have to push that equilibrium point to from a corrupt equilibrium to a non-corrupt equilibrium. But that requires a major shift in policy, and that requires to be persistent, right? It's not going to be like, okay, let's elect this new governor. He is anti-corruption. That's how his stance is. That's how he's going to work, and blah 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 blah. And then, yeah, you don't see the results in 2 days, so you elect someone else. Bam, you're in this vicious cycle. So,
Great. Thank you.
um, so we have to basically uh, be patient dealing with this massive problem.
Fantastic. I think that's a good place to take a pause and move into questions and answers. And so while we await hands to be raised, so what you've been saying reminds me of what Michael's deep democratization, and I believe you've both written on legal versus illegal corruption. And so there's one anecdote that you have in the book about I think it was a municipality, it might have been a state or a municipality where a law was changed that made it, that
It's Alabama.
made nepotism
Yeah.
redefined nepotism, so it's only children under 18 and spouses, and it changed the definition of bribery or the amounts that were allowed, and so that legalized what should be illegal corruption. And you do get into this whole definitional question: is it, does it have to be illegal? One of the points I didn't see being made is that, well, so often things, practices were being used and they became illegal because they were considered corrupt, right? But I was just wondering if you could maybe address that issue of how legal corruption is a type of state capture that helps to embed corruption at the local level.
They're very closely related in the sense that legal corruption revolves around very powerful, well-funded, well-entrenched interests to begin with, and they are, and we're seeing this in recent Supreme Court decisions as well, not only involving political contributions, but also the fact that a lot of what you and I would think of as bribes are now just gratuities, and they're fully legal. those kinds of interests have helped to create the system under which they operate, and they will defend and exploit that system, and are doing an all too perfect job of it. And in that sense, I think we mislead ourselves if we think of the notion of corruption solely as legal, first of all, and secondly, if we think of the legal conception of corruption as exhausting what people are upset about. A very good political scientist named Mark Warren says that in a democracy, the essence of corruption is what he calls duplicitous exclusion. That is, citizens are crowded out of decisions they have a right to participate in, and where they have a right to have a voice. And people in a very diffuse but deeply felt way have that sense about the role of money in the American system. And what is going to solve that, if not solve it, but what's going to make progress on that, is not just another round of laws, and certainly not further jurisprudence, but it's going to be a political push, a political problem. And at the moment in the United States, that's one of our biggest weaknesses. The political system isn't earning the trust of people. It isn't earning the participation, single-digit participations in Dallas. I mean, that's not democratic politics. And so in that sense, it's hard to look at the current situation and not be really pessimistic. At least that's my own personal assessment.
Just one funny anecdote from a journalist in New Mexico. When we surveyed the journalists, we also put a comment section, say if they wanted to write something. And he says about the state legislators in New Mexico, he says, if a couple of, big name lobbyists come to Albuquerque, our politicians start giggling like high school girls. This was his definition of state senators and state house members in New Mexico. So yes, they are. So it's basically they become so affectionate with this money coming into their campaigns, because it's really, if you look at how much money is spent at local elections, it's really not that expensive to win a seat in Illinois Senate or New Mexico Senate. Just a little bit of money moves the needle. And that opens up the path to state capture, basically.
Great, thank you very much. We have Giovanna, and then Nicolas Jaramillo, and then Nicolas Lagos.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the presentation. Yeah, I am wondering, you say that we already know that there is variation at the subnational level in the country. So I am wondering if also the roots of corruption could be different at the subnational level, because we already know that these big comparisons between countries, and we have that the roots of corruption depends on historical things, on economic development, but could be also we can have also variations in the roots of corruption at the subnational level?
My other sort of academic fascinations over the long term is to disaggregate corruption. I mean, I think I see different syndromes of it. I think others may have maybe on the verge of coming up with a better set of categories than mine. But we can even see those variations within countries as well. Australia is another federal state, and its smallest state is Tasmania, and it has a syndrome of its own, what I call elite cartels, quite different from the rest of Australia. And those are important variations as well. So, this is what more versus less misses, and that is in different countries, different parts of countries, people are contending over different issues, different stakes, and different political techniques for gaining and defending those kinds of wins. And so, in a sense, we have a concept that has it's useful because it directs our attention to so much, but it is so difficult to get a handle on what we're talking about without disaggregating it into other categories. I don't think I've given a very good answer to your question, which is a very good one, but those are issues that certainly concern me as well.
I think the country level indices are very, very important to show people that corruption is bad. Because remember, we spent a lot of time everywhere in the world to show people that smoking is bad, right? Everybody knew that smoking is bad for you, but it took a long time to convince people that yes, it is really bad for you. So now, thanks to these corruption indices at the country level, we finally convinced people that corruption is bad. That grease the wheel hypothesis crap, I think that's gone. I mean, because there are not a lot of crazies out there today saying that no, corruption is good for the economy. Yeah, for the maybe next 30 days, yes. You can build the road, but then yeah, people die in 10 years from now. So that is important. But like you said, Joe, I mean, this one solution does not fit for all. So that's the thing. Maybe the consequences are the same, but when it comes to solutions, then you cannot have just like at some point, World Bank came up with this brilliant idea of decentralization. And they tried to sell that idea to the solution to every problem you're having. So there's poverty, decentralized. There's inequality, decentralized. There's environmental disasters, decentralized. No, it doesn't work that way. Decentralization might work in some countries where democratic traditions are high because the idea behind decentralization is people are more active politically, but if people are more not active politically, you decentralize it. So now the local politicians start stealing more. So it's the same result, right? So I think when it comes to identifying the causes and identifying the solutions, then going into more details and finding local level indices, local level measures, local level solutions become important. But I mean, I don't want you to misunderstand me or Michael. We're not saying that these country level indices are not useful at all. No, they are. They are great because we learned a lot using them and then we built on them.
Early on was just to show that the problem is everywhere and you can't escape or ignore it. A long time ago, I was involved in planning the big international anti-corruption conferences, which have now mushroomed into this immense thing. But very early on, a group of us were inviting countries to send representatives or delegates, if they wanted to think of it that way, to the one of the early conferences. And we got a response from Japan saying, thank you for the invitation, what sounds like a very interesting conference on corruption. However, in Japan, we do not have this problem, so we will not be sending delegates. Full stop. Nobody tries to say that anymore. And in agenda building terms, that's a real accomplishment.
Perfect. Thank you. Nicolás Jaramillo.
Many thanks, professors. Just two questions briefly. The first one, if I understood properly, you stated that there were differences, at least minimal differences between regions regarding how they understand corruption. Maybe could you provide a couple of examples in the sense that there are differences in the way to observe, for instance, electoral financing or lobbying or so on, or the differences are in other issues? That's the first question. And the second one, although we speak about legal corruption, we know that if we speak about legal corruption, the normative standard should be located in another field, not in the law, but in another one. Then when you speak about legal corruption, which is where are the standards, or which are the normative standards that you're taking on just to speak about legal corruption? And many thanks for your presentation again.
That question, the examples, again, I go back to Daniel Elazar's three categories or three American political subcultures. And they, by the way, exist in combinations in several states and so forth. But in states like New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, lobbying, political spending, persuasion processes are thought of as a routine part of the game. Politics is sort of looking out for me and my people in my town and my ethnic group and so forth. Whereas in Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa, where I grew up, right in the middle of the country, that sort of activity is seen as very suspect and the essence of corruption. So there's not only a different level of tolerance, but a different conception of what the problem is to begin with. And compare that then to the South and parts of the Southwest, traditionalistic political culture. And there often corruption is sort of what the courthouse gang gets up to, the sort of 6 or 8 guys, or people, usually guys, around a table at the courthouse, dividing up the road contracts, or outside the South, the snow plowing contracts. And that's a different approach to corruption as well. And in many cases, we see differences, and Oz has pointed this out very well, as to what people will not tolerate. And there are also differences in terms of what people regard as the natural order of things. Lobbying is bad, campaign contributions are bad. That's just the name of the game. Well, that's New York speaking. Wisconsin, Minnesota would have very little of that.
I mean, some reporters actually in their when we sent out the survey, we get it's an internet-based survey, so we get the responses. Sometimes I receive these emails. Like a few of these emails, actually, one of them was from a journalist in New York. And his response was, this is a stupid survey. What you're calling legal corruption is politics. So that was his response, right? So I'm just thinking, dude, if you're thinking this is politics, then, good luck with your life. So, and this is, I mean, and it's amazing, really, because Elazar, when he drew his map showing these political cultures, he used data from late 1800s, early 1900s. Today is 2025, and it explains a lot of things, because it is, I mean, it's really hard to change the political culture of a state. And this happens, I mean, from some other issue, like generalized trust. Rigal Zlaner, he has this great paper showing, why are some states more trusting than the others. And he looked at the data, he found that if states were populated in the, again, late 1800s, with people coming from, say, Sweden, Norway, they are the more trusting states. So, like, trust is generational, right? So you learn to trust from your grandmothers, from your grandfathers, and the corruption is the same thing. You learn to tolerate it from your grandmothers and grandfathers. And yes, you might affect, I mean, I'm not saying that if you are living in an individualistic state, you're doomed to be corrupt forever. But no, then you have to implement certain policies to change that. But it will not be required for other states. Center for Public, what was that? ProPublica, this investigative journalist group in United States. They conducted this study twice. They hired a journalist in each state, and they gave that journalist, I think, roughly like 300 questions. And that journalist's responsibility was to conduct interviews, to look at the state laws and everything. And they wanted to measure the corruptibility of a state. And in their index, Vermont found to be one of the most corruptible states. In fact, more corruptible than New Jersey. Why? Because they looked at how many laws are there against corruption in the state of New Jersey. Because New Jersey is a deeply corrupt state, they try to write a new law every day, and then the politicians find a new way to be corrupt. So you have these books, very thick, all anti-corruption this, anti-corruption that. Whereas in Vermont, they're not corrupt, so they don't need any laws. So they find Vermont to be very, very corruptible because Vermont doesn't need any laws to fight corruption because there is no corruption. So I mean, there is no illness. You don't have to vaccinate anybody because there is no illness there. There's nothing.
Parallel to that too, and that is the country in the European Union with the most laws against corruption is Italy. And in Italy, you really almost can't move 2 steps in any direction without breaking one of those laws in one way or another. And your political opponents will have laws readily at hand to go after you. And so this very extensive legislative process is perhaps part of the problem. I want to go back very briefly to the second excellent part of Nicholas' question, and that is legality isn't going to be enough. What have we got to look at here? Mark Warren, who I quoted a few minutes ago, is a political philosopher, and he has said in print some of the most intelligent things about corruption that are out there. And political philosophy, or back to Arnold Heidenheimer's classic typology of corruption types. I can tell you by having taught it to several generations of undergraduates that what most people take away is black, gray, and white corruption, gradations of yada yada yada. They ignore the other dimension of his table, which is different types of political systems, different types of regimes. And within those different types of regimes, what qualifies as black, gray, or white corruption varies significantly. And so there's a whole case to be made for studying types of regimes, conceptions of justice, conceptions of accountability, before we even get to the question of saying, well, is this particular action corrupt or not? So, Nicholas has made a very important point, and that is we've got a tremendous amount of work to do to build bridges to other disciplines who are looking at important aspects of these issues. So thank you for that question.
Great. Thank you. We're almost out of time, but Nicolas Lagos has one last question.
Yeah, I will try to be super brief. So greetings from New Jersey, one of the... So my question is, I'm originally from Chile. So one of the big problems or challenges that we have in Latin America is this idea that the voters in Latin America, they continue voting for corrupt politicians under the logic that this politician steals, but they do things, they delivers, right? So it doesn't matter their integrity on this. So that really resonates with what you described about how in the US people is very angry against corruption. They have lower tolerance in corruption practices. However, they vote for people with low integrity standards. So I'm curious to know about your opinion about this. Is something that you think is only temporarily reaction in the US based on the specific personal characteristics of the US president, or is part of a larger problem like a long-term trend similar to the Latin America, where people is voting for corrupt politicians and where integrity doesn't matter on that issue?
I think it's very long term, and it will attach to different personalities or different events from time to time. And in particular, what is happening in recent years is that the sort of level of fear that has been created in our system by various politicians, and I would, all right, both of our major parties are implicated in that, but one of them far more than the other. Betraying my biases, perhaps, the level of resentment, expectations that are not being met, even if the expectations were not realistic to begin with. A lot of what people have in mind about corruption is whatever it is that benefits that guy across the street. and oh, that makes it corrupt. That's they're really just playing politics, and I'm being left out. When in fact most American citizens are treated very well and very fairly and live very fortunate lives. And so, in that sense, the diffuse nature of the resentment is the permanent part of it. The particular attachments or the particular manifestations in any given year do change from time to time. But the difficulties, the fundamental lack of trust has been with us for a long time and will be as far as I can foresee.
The one reason that I see is I don't think there is a lot of street level corruption in Chile, is there? Like when you need a driver's license, do you pay a bribe?
No, no.
No. See, I think that matters a lot. So when people don't see the harmful results of corruption, they put corruption at the very, very end of their preference list. So like in Turkey, it was the same for a long time. Yeah, they steal, but they deliver, right? But now, in the last 5 years, people also started paying bribes to actually do anything that they need, right? Now the corruption is becoming very important in their preference listing, right? In US, we don't have any street level corruption at all. So people, I think there should be a way to show people that, dude, look, the state that you're in, it's a very poor state. It's because your state has been corrupt for the last 20 years. And if if your kids are not getting a good education, one of the reasons is corruption. If you're not getting a good healthcare, one of the reasons is corruption. But it's similar to this, like, during the last COVID pandemic, a lot of people were reluctant to get the vaccinated, right? And after their neighbor dies, bam, they run to the hospital to get the vaccine, right? You have to see the negative impacts of that corruption to actually be vocal against it. That's actually, I think, the main reason. And the other problem is countries like Chile and Turkey and a bunch of other countries in the world, people see every option as corrupt. So they basically say, this party is corrupt, but hey, the alternative is also corrupt. They have no trust in the democratic system, and the democratic system is so corrupt that it doesn't allow anybody clean to come into the system. That's what has been happening it's actually the standard machine politics in a lot of the states in the US too. So you have to belong to one group to become a mayoral candidate, to become a Senate candidate, so on and so forth. So, but that is a long. I mean, people need to be patient. If they trust someone to be clean and they elect that clean person in government, they have to give him time, but it never happens. Because he cannot deliver in 4 years. He cannot produce a clean system in 4 years, and people don't see the results. Bam, he is gone. The old guys come back.
My apologies for jumping in on you. I just think you made a very important point about what the international reform movement gets wrong, and that is that we market anti-corruption as a public good for everyone. This is going to have better government for everyone. The whole society will be better off. Well, corruption is bad. Well, so is pollution, but it's not until your water turns yellow or brown or what doesn't run at all that people really get concerned. And what we need to be saying about corruption is linking reforms to the way people live and experience the issue. Corruption is why when you go to the health center, there's nobody there. And corruption is why in your children's schools, they don't all have a book or they don't all have the same book. Corruption is why you've got potholes in your street and a police officer on the corner who wants to pick your pocket. Those kinds of issues, rather than sort of grand systemic sort of dilemmas, they are very real, but they are also public issues. Bring the issue home to the way in which people live and experience it.
Excellent closing points. Thank you both so much. I wish we could all go out and get a cup of coffee and keep talking about this for hours. But unfortunately, we are out of time. So thank you all for being here. Oz and Michael, thank you for this very important book. And it's available on Amazon. Anybody that still doesn't have it. And look forward to seeing you all at the next ACA Forum. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye.